How many of you have ever participated in a relationship with more than one person? Do you think it's something you could do? Is love something that can be shared? I'm Emma Robertson, and I'm here to talk to you today about monogamous relationships in comparison to non-monogamous relationships. This is the study I will be referencing. It was produced in the Department of Psychology at the Oakland University and published in 2015. To reference how I began, I would love to begin this presentation wondering, if anyone's comfortable, have you participated in a non-monogamous relationship? Raise your hand. See, so there are a few. It is rare, but it's also more common than one might think. As of 2017, it's estimated that 5% of Americans have participated in non-monogamous relationships. To begin, I want to be clear what I mean when I use these terms. Regarding monogamy, I do not mean it in terms of marriage. For monogamy now, I mean the practice of having one sexual partner in a relationship. For consensually monogamous relationships, I will exclusively be considering groups of 3 people. The participant will have a primary and secondary partner. As we all learned in our reading, there are many different forms of non-monogamous relationships. So here, I will be comparing these 2 groups. And when we begin to understand and digest the results, I want you to consider 3 different categories. The first would be the traits exhibited in these relationships concerning intimacy, openness, desirability, and some others. The second would be the level of satisfaction reported by the participants. And the third, we will sort of understand when we get to the conclusion of perceived levels of success in these relationships. So, this study was produced by a survey online. Participants were recruited via social media websites, e-groups that were frequented by non-monogamous people, and other online chat forums. The demographics of the age of the participants for monogamous, the average was 27.2, and the average age of non-monogamous participants was 28. When we look at the race of the participants, it unfortunately is severely lacking diversity, with about 90% identifying as white, and the other 10% identifying as Black, Asian, Latino, Hispanic, or another category non-specified. When we look at the gender, we actually see that with both monogamous and non-monogamous participants, roughly 65% were women. When we look at their sexual orientation, we see that bisexual participants and heterosexual participants contribute the large majority, over 95% in fact. Because this is a comparative study, I want to establish what these 3 groups are that we will be comparing. The first is pretty straightforward. It is the monogamous participants evaluating their own relationships with monogamous individuals. The second and third regard the non-monogamous participants, the second regarding their primary partner, and the third group referring to their secondary partner. Now, this survey had many different kinds of questions, and I want to kind of illustrate what the survey looked like before we understand the results. Here's a question where participants were asked to evaluate their own comfort level and attitude regarding monogamy or non-monogamy, which really informed the rest of the study. Here, we have a list of 3 different categories, and these categories were brought up in a section of the survey where participants were asked to rate and evaluate their partners according to these traits. Lastly, we see the mate value part of the survey, where participants were asked to evaluate themselves regarding these different traits as a mate. Once they completed this process, they then were asked to do it with their partner or partners. Now, this survey was incredibly long and incredibly extensive, so I do not have enough time to address all of the results. So I decided to focus my findings for you today on the ones that relate toward relationship satisfaction. When we look at these findings specifically, we have found 6 key comparisons that show significance. They are embodied in these 3 different comparisons. And to just reestablish, when I use the word primary, I mean the relationship of a non-monogamous participant with their primary partner, and respectively the same so on with the term secondary. The first category illustrates that monogamous participants reported a higher amount of intimacy and closeness than they did in comparison to non-monogamous participants with their secondary partners. Additionally, monogamous participants showed that they had a greater potential to resolve conflict than non-monogamous participants did with their secondary partners. In this next section, we see that primary partners' relationships actually illustrate more communication and openness than they did in monogamous relationships. And lastly, we see that non-monogamous participants were more likely to engage in conversation regarding sexual engagements outside of the couple with their secondary partner over the primary partner. However, they did include that they would be more likely to downplay these experiences when talking with their primary partner. Although lastly, we saw that there was a significant greater level of satisfaction found with their primary partners compared to their secondary partners. I next have a few quantitative studies that I also want to illustrate to you. This one specifically shows that regarding partner satisfaction, there is essentially no real difference compared to monogamous participants and their satisfaction with their mates compared to non-monogamous participants with their primary mate. Here, we consider relationship satisfaction, and we can see relationship satisfaction exclusively within the non-monogamous group. And we can see that there was much more satisfaction regarding the relationships with their primary partners. And lastly, this graph illustrates the findings from when the participants had to evaluate themselves in terms of desirability as a mate in comparison to their partners. In this graph, 0 would be the average level of desirability they found within themselves. So we can see they considered both their primary and secondary partners to be more desirable as a mate overall. However, when we look toward the desirability as a long-term mate, the primary partner does continue to be more desirable than the participant themselves. However, as we can see, there's a significant decrease in desirability when we look toward the secondary partner. So that was a lot of data. What are some key takeaways? I found that perhaps one of the most significant takeaways for me was the fact that there was not a difference in level of partner satisfaction between monogamous relationships and primary relationships. Additionally, from the studies I presented to you today and the rest of the information that I did digest from this study, it really became clear that open communication and overall openness and honesty were significant contributors toward overall satisfaction and success in relationships. And again, going back to the fact that relationships of non-monogamous participants with primary partners were the ones that reported the highest level of these traits. The last is the fact that even though I'm discussing success with non-monogamous relationships, there's still this underlying sort of desirability for some kind of pair bonding or companionship, evidenced in when they were more likely to downplay their sexual experiences. So it is interesting that whatever we might feel, there's some form of desire to attach to an individual. Now, this survey had many limitations. One, they came from social media websites, which limits the amount of people that could access the survey. Again, the total amount of participants was just about 200, which is far too little. Also, participants had to currently be in a relationship, and many people just aren't in a relationship right now, unfortunately, so they were not eligible. Again, this was a self-reported study, so we can really only take these findings with a grain of salt. Additionally, there was essentially no diversity in the study. And lastly, they didn't consider other forms of consensual non-monogamous relationships. However, there was one other limitation that was not mentioned in the study that I think is very important. When we look at the original responses from participants of the amount of partners they have, we see two distinct categories where they explicitly say that they consider these partners to be equal. And also, in Polyweb, that could also be the case, we just don't know. Therefore, 40% of the participants possibly were forced to rank, like maybe unnaturally or not congruent with their true feelings, just in order to participate in the study and find a primary and secondary partner. In conclusion, I really just have the sense of so many times we think of love, romance, sex, and companionship as these things that go hand in hand. But it's very clear they don't necessarily need to. We all have different needs, and if you're able to find them, give them to other people in healthy and consensual ways, it can still produce an equal level of satisfaction. Communication, honesty, and respect are things that, again, I addressed are large contributors of it. And lastly, honestly, I think it's so important to consider our culture and how our beliefs of this reflect how we feel. And now I ask yourselves, do you think you could participate in a non-monogamous relationship, long-term, short-term? I'll leave you with that.